Discover the latest health tips, expert advice, and inspiring stories. This is the Health Channel Podcast. Your journey to better health starts now.
Welcome to Ask the Doc. I'm Olga Villaverde. If you play sports, you might eventually get injured. It's just part of the game. And there's no part of the body that sustains more injuries than the wrist. With so many bones, ligaments, tendons, and joints keeping hands and wrist working, there's ample opportunity for injury, especially for athletes. So, hand and wrist surgeon Dr. Ouellette will share her knowledge about wrist injuries, answer your questions on today's episode of Ask the Doc. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Ask the Doc, the show where we encourage our viewers to send in their health questions. We've got so many great questions. We're actually going to start with Declan, who reached out to us through our website, allhealthtv.com. Dr. Ouellette, I'm going to read the question and we'll talk about it in just a bit. Hi, Dr. Ouellette. My son sprained his wrist 6 weeks ago playing basketball for his high school team. He says he's ready to get back on the court, but I'm not sure if his wrist is stable yet. What are your thoughts? So 6 weeks, doctor, can the son get back in the game?
Well, number one, has he had an evaluation by a physician? And that's really key, and x-rays. And I can only tell you, having missed my own son's scaphoid fracture for 2 weeks, because he kept telling me, well, it's not that bad. And I finally said, you're going to see your physician, and we're going to make sure that it's really not that bad, only to find he had a scaphoid fracture. Trust me, that was a big joke around town, that I missed my own son's scaphoid. So you want to make sure you don't have any of these smaller fractures that many times are undisplaced and very difficult to see on the initial x-ray. So that's number one. But let's say that we don't have anything like that, and it's literally just a sprain. In other words, you've injured a ligament, but what have you done over that 6 weeks? Did he splint it during that time, or was it just rest? And the problem that I have found with people, that if they don't splint their wrists, then they're still moving them. And then the wrist still stretching and stressing those ligaments, and it doesn't give them a chance to heal. So one of the things that I encourage people to do is to wear a splint for that first 6 weeks and wear it 24/7. And I use this kind of splint, which is a exo splint. It's almost like a cast, but particularly for young athletes, it allows them to take it off and take a shower, keep it clean, and otherwise keep them. They can also work out. If it's only a sprain, they can still work out, but I have them use a lion's paw, which is a leather brace that the gymnasts use for the uneven parallel bars, the vault, the rings, the pommel. You've seen it in the Olympics. And so it's that leather brace that they're strapping around their wrist just to give their wrist support, because you don't want to lose your conditioning that you've also built up over all these years. So a sprain will tolerate that. Whereas if it's a broken bone, you need to deal with that differently, depending on which bone is broken.
Great information. Thank you, doctor. Let's go now to Bunny, who sent in a question through YouTube, and let's see what she writes. Hello, doctor. My daughter, Phoebe, is a middle schooler who plays on one of our country club tennis team. I occasionally see her massaging her wrist during matches. How important is racket type or grip size in preventing injuries? Good question there.
Well, the way to determine if your racket is not right for you is, are you able to accomplish the appropriate form for your tennis play? And the only way you can do that is you've got to have a teacher, a coach that you trust and that you'll listen to. And they will work you through whether you're in too heavy a racket, your racket's strung too tight for whatever you're doing. So you definitely want to work with a pro and not just go out there and whack-a-mole, so to speak. And so with that, she will find which racket fits her the best. But at the same time, racket sports and tennis, we find that those people have 80% triangular fiber cartilage tears. That's a tear of a ligament that attaches your ulna to the radius as well as your ulna to the carpal bones. And it loves to tear out at the edge, which then makes you unstable out here. So see how my wrist swings off? I have a TFCC tear. 80% of dead people have a TFCC tear, which tells you it's part of being a human being and living. But you want to protect yourself from that, particularly if you want to play tennis. And let's say that she wanted to play in high school and she wants to go on to play in college and maybe pro. And if that's the case, then she needs to start protecting herself. And again, lion's paws for working out, and the wrist widget, which is a splint that comes like this, can give tremendous support, still allow the swing through in a racket. And so it's the torque that is happening as you're moving your wrist and still hitting something. So that's the problem with tennis. And so again, she should work with a pro on her form. She should get evaluated for what instability and what splints might be valuable. It isn't necessary to go straight to surgery or anything like that, but it would be reasonable to check this out.
All right, let's now take a question from Facebook, and this one comes in with Franklin, and he has a question for us. So let's read it. Hey, Doc, my boy Jamal plays on both sides of the ball on his school football team, free safety and tight end. That's great. He hurt his wrist during the last game, and the orthopedist said he has wrist instability. I've never heard of that term before. Is it the same as a sprained wrist? I'll be honest, doctor, I've never heard of that term as well.
Well, wrist instability indicates a ligament has been torn and that now things are unstable. The question is which ligament and which instability. So for instance, particularly for football, a tear between the scaphoid and the lunate, which has a scapholunate ligament complex, that is a potential problem, because if those two bones have separated out, then what happens is you're going to be a setup for arthritis. And that's actually a ligament tear you do want to fix in a young athlete early on. On the other hand, if it's a TFCC tear and instability, again, like what I have, or it's a volar radioscaphocapitate ligament, which again, you can splint, you can treat it conservatively, they can still work out, but with a lion's paw. And then if things are still painful and bothersome, then discuss potential surgery. So you match it on what their season is going to be, in part because this young man, I can't tell exactly what age he is, but I kind of got the feeling that he was a junior. And if he's a junior, you know you're trying out with prospective college teams seeing you, and that's one of your tickets to keep going on in football. So if that's the case and he can still play, but play with taping and protecting this until the end of the season to get it fixed, that's great. Unless it's a scapholunate ligament tear, in which case you do need to fix that one as quickly as possible.
And doctor, if you don't mind, there were a couple of signs of wrist instability. Let's look at that real quick. And can you just talk about it just for a few seconds? Here we go.
Right. So pain or discomfort after activity, weakness in the wrist. In other words, a sense of giving way, because it's with that instability, now these bones begin to slop up and down. And when they do that, you can't hold your wrist stable. Difficulty gripping equipment, swelling or tenderness, and then the looseness or the clicking in the joint. So, all these kinds of motions back and forth, up and down, all these things can give you clicks based on the kind of ligament that you're injured.
All right, we're going to go to Instagram now, and we have a question from Delilah. So let's take that one. And she writes, Dr. Ouellette, our daughter, Daphna, is a talented figure skater who aspires to make the U.S. women's figure skating team. Oh my gosh, that's fantastic. Unfortunately, she took a spill at a recent competition and has a hairline fracture on her right wrist. What can she do to strengthen her wrist so she doesn't hurt herself again?
Well, several things. Once you have a hairline fracture, particularly when you're a major competing athlete, you want to just go. And you don't want to stop, but you need to. You need to learn how to protect yourself and let yourself heal. And bones take at least 6 weeks to be knitting back together, but 3 months to be totally knitted back together. And we know that from bone scans and other tests, which people have followed in order to know what time it takes to heal bones. Now, of course, 3 months seems like an eternity to a figure skater at a high competitive level. And but there's many exercises and things that you can do that keep your tone and your ability going, even though you're not on the ice competing. And so you're going to have to back up and really protect that for at least 6 weeks until you have evidence of healing, both clinically and on X-ray. Number 2, how do you strengthen yourself and make yourself invulnerable? Not possible. So you have to be thoughtful. Now, what do I mean by that? So again, for exercising, for lifting weights, use the lion's paw. Protect your wrists when you're lifting weights. And for exercising, etc., there's no muscle that crosses the wrist. So unfortunately, unlike the shoulder, elbow, hip, or knee, which do have muscles that cross, none cross the wrist and none cross the ankle. So these are both two joints that are very vulnerable to injuries, both fractures and ligament tears. So as much as you try and strengthen things, that's not going to help. But what will help is if you add tape, or like, the wrist widget, but taping for competition. And you are wearing these long sleeves, which will hide a lot of sins. So, all those NBA players wearing all those sleeves, there's a lot of taping going under there that would signal to the other team which injuries are being treated. Therefore, sleeves. So you do the same. Make that part of your costume so it covers your wrist and tape it. Now, taping, believe it or not, and we know this from the biomechanics lab, will increase the strength of your joint 2 times. It could be literally just a brown paper grocery bag taped around, and it would increase the strength. So use KT tape to strengthen both your wrists and your ankles, particularly when you're in those kind of competitive sports. And unfortunately, you're moving at high speeds in skating, whether it's hockey or figure skating. And so your chances of getting a fracture are high.
I did not realize that about the long sleeves. So now I'm going to be looking for that more, Dr. Ouellette. All right. Let's go to Facebook now. And we have a question from Christian, and he writes the following. Dr. Ouellette, I play hoops in a men's league with some good friends of mine. My wrists always hurt after games. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to stop playing anytime soon, but I would like to know what non-surgical treatments are recommended for managing wrist pain and instability. That is a great question. That's even one for me, to be honest. And I know we also have a list, doctor, of non-surgical treatments for wrist that we can also show our viewers.
Okay. So obviously rest and ice to reduce swelling and inflammation, but bracing. Again, I put up this exosplint. So who taught me that bracing and anti-inflammatories and protecting people while they're working out you can actually get them to slide on by the injury and still play NBA. So for many years, you see young players come to the NBA and they're coming out of the college leagues. And you would think that college basketball would be just as competitive as the NBA, but it isn't. It's another step up to the NBA. And this is true for the European players that move from the European League into the NBA. They're stunned to find out how physical and tough the NBA is. So with that, you don't want to stop somebody playing in the middle of their season if they're not grossly unstable and can't perform. So the key is to splint as much as you can, truly close to 24/7 at night and during the day, and then use the lion's paw for lifting weights because you don't want to lose your conditioning, and then tape or use a wrist widget again for when you're playing, because a wrist widget will still allow you this full motion and the ability to shoot and to dribble. And but it will also protect you. And if you'll do that and be diligent with it for at least a 3 to 6 month period, you may find yourself just slide by the surgeon and not need us. This is good for you. So don't lose your energy to do that.
Speaking of energy, I am so excited for this next question, and I had it on my mind, but Natalia beat me to the punch. It's a YouTube question, and I'm thrilled she's asking this. Dr. Ouellette, I think I'm the last person in my neighborhood to jump on the pickleball train. I played a little tennis back in the day, so I'm curious just how different pickleball is. Are you seeing the same kind of injuries for both sports? So I played a little bit of tennis too in my, younger days. Thought of picking up pickleball. What are your thoughts?
Definitely seeing many of the same kind of injuries.
Really?
Right. And that's because, you've got that flick of the wrist. And of course, when did you start playing pickleball? 50 to 60 years old. So remember, I already told you 80% of dead people have a TFCC tear. So it's no big surprise that you would then begin to recognize that TFCC. Same story. Wear the splint night and during the day as you can. Wear the lion's paw for working out. Use the wrist widget for playing pickleball. And do as much as that as you can over a 3 to 6 month period to see if this works. Because here's the other wonderful thing. If you need surgery, if you realize, I'm not going to be able to play pickleball and I really want to do that, and I'm going to explain to you why you want to in a minute, is this surgery the same and has the same surgical outcome no matter when you do it? Yes. It doesn't matter whether you do it now or 2 years from now or 5 years from now. It will be the same outcome. So unlike the scapholunate ligament, which does have a history of arthritis developing over a 2-year period, these other injuries that occur with pickleball and tennis, not so much. So you have time. And many times, just like in the NBA, this is going to settle you down and get that to hold up. And now, why do you want to play pickleball? Let's go into that. Because you actually do. You want to play racket sports because it turns out that racket sports have the least cognitive decline and dementia. Isn't that interesting?
Wow,
I
that's
suspect that has to do with physics, i.e., you have to interact with the ball, you have to know where your body is in space, but you also are communicating to your competitors across the net and your teammate next to you. And so with that, it allows you to be one of the best you can be in terms of health. And so that community, that interaction with other people, and then that interacting with the physics of a ball, a racket, and a net, and it seems to really help with cognitive ability. So yes, you do want to play pickleball. So we want to find ways to keep you on the court and not in casts and getting surgery. Okay.
I love it. Thank you, Dr. Ouellette. All right, so we got another question from our website, allhealthtv.com, and it's from Jimbo. Let's see what he writes. Hi, Dr. Ouellette. It's been a while, but I'm thinking of taking up tennis again. Boy, tennis is really popular and pickleball. But before I do, I'd like to know if there are any specific risk factors that make some players more prone to wrist injuries. Good question.
Well, so for tennis, we've just been through this. Your average human, 80% of dead people have a tear in this ligament.
Right.
And that is tennis. That's golf, too. By the way, the non-dominant hand in golf. So there are risks. But once again, you want to do it for the social, for the cognitive support that it gives you. You want to do it. So how can you minimize the injury? Well, number one, work on your form. So if you haven't played tennis before or you're going back to it, please work with a pro. And so when I have dealt with wrist injuries with pros, one of the most successful things that I do is have them work with their coach and use the sport to strengthen what they're doing and to get the correct form. But don't be afraid of taping. Don't be afraid of using a wrist widget. You're not going out there to compete in a way that you can't wear those things on the court. So that's what you want to do. And will you actually prevent wrist instability? Don't look at it that way. It was coming because you're human. By the way, why is that? We are dart and javelin throwers. The other primates cannot do this because this bone attaches to that bone and prevents that motion. So that's why they do the chop, putting the stick down the inside of the termite hill. We don't have to do that. We can drop it in like this. So that's why we get into these troubles. So just, wear splints, protect yourself. You can't strengthen it, but make sure that you have the right form.
Excellent stuff. All right, let's go to YouTube now. And Rusty, let's check in with him and see what he writes to Dr. Ouellette. Hi, Dr. O. I was a real jock growing up, playing a number of different sports, and I've done manual labor most of my life. So my wrists are something of a minefield these days. The doctor diagnosed me with wrist instability and is suggesting surgery. What are your thoughts on the matter? Doctor?
Well, number one, X-rays and looking at MRIs to determine which ligaments are injured. And as I just told you, a TFCC or a volar radioscaphocapitate ligament, that's the ligament that goes underneath from your radius into your capitate, but it's deep in your wrist. Those two, you can fix at any time and have the same result. But a scapholunate dissociation, that needs to get fixed right away. So the question is, which wrist instability is it? And, does it absolutely need to be fixed? And wrist instability implies a ligament tear, such that now you've got laxity between two bones or someplace in the wrist. And so that's really the question, is which ligament is it and what should we do? And once again, if it's scapholunate, that does need to be repaired. If it is radioscaphocapitate or TFCC, many times the splint, if you'll be diligent, will get that to improve by 1 to 2 grades of laxity, and therefore you don't need the surgery.
All right, we have a couple minutes left, so let's get to this question quickly. allhealthtv.com from our website. Murata, she writes in, Dr. Ouellette, my weekend warrior husband hurt his wrist playing soccer. He's kind of a baby when it comes to medical testing. Having said that, I'd like to know what are the most common tests or imaging techniques used to assess wrist damage. So would that be X-ray, doctor, MRI? Which one?
Right. You start with X-rays because you'll see the relationship of the bones. So for instance, you will see a scapholunate dissociation on the X-ray. That's a given. The other ligament tears you will not see because they're in the soft tissues and they don't cause dramatic shifts in the bone. So an MRI would be more appropriate for the other ligaments.
Okay, let me get this question in as well, doctor. It's from Bertram, since we still have a minute. We try to get to as many as possible. Can wrist instability be mistaken for other types of injuries such as tendinitis or fracture? Got about a minute left, doctor.
It can. And many times it is nerve or muscle weakness. So for instance, I saw 3 young men, high-level athletes, 1 tennis, 2 golf, who came in complaining of their wrists, but on exam, their entire arm was weak. All of them had just recently had a vaccine. Now, fortunately, it all resolved, but they did have positive nerve tests, which indicated that the nerves did sustain damage. Do we see that in carpal tunnel and or ulnar nerve? Yes. So every wrist instability, I always check for nerves to make sure that we don't have weakness that is also causing the instability because their muscles aren't strong.
Fantastic. And the last thing I'm going to ask you real quick is the other day I was literally rollerblading around my neighborhood and I forgot to put those things on. Danger, danger, right?
Correct. I went rollerblading once and fell and I said, what am I thinking? I'm a surgeon, and I stopped.
But it's so much fun. Dr. Ouellette, so much time. I appreciate everything, your insight and your expertise.
Thank
and
you.
that's all we have for today on this episode of Ask the Doc. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Health Channel podcast. We hope this information has been useful. However, please remember that only your doctor can advise you about what is best for you. Do not start, modify, or suspend treatment based on anything you have heard on this podcast. Please join us again soon.